I never imagined the man who gave me life could become the person who tried to take everything from me. My name is Daniel. I'm 34 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family has been a complicated puzzle, one that never quite fit together the way I hoped. After my parents divorced when I was a teenager, the fractures in our family only deepened, but nothing prepared me for the storm that was about to come. My father remarried quickly, almost as if trying to erase the past, and that new chapter introduced an undercurrent of tension I couldn't shake. Meanwhile, I was building my own life, finding a partner who meant the world to me, someone I thought would be my safe harbor. But beneath the surface, something was quietly unraveling. There's a strange kind of weight that settles in your chest when the people closest to you start acting like strangers. When conversations grow thin and the warmth in their eyes fades into something colder, harder to read. My sister, once my closest ally, began drifting away, her loyalty shifting in ways I couldn't understand. It wasn't just the silence between us. It was the small things. The way she avoided my gaze, the subtle dismissals, the guarded smiles that never quite reached her eyes. My father's presence, once a source of comfort, started carrying an edge of something more dangerous. A sense of entitlement that felt wrong but I struggled to name. I kept telling myself that families are messy, that everyone has their flaws, and that maybe I was just being too sensitive. But deep down, I knew this was different. There was a quiet injustice threading through our interactions, a creeping shadow that cast doubt over everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. The woman I loved, my fiancée, was caught in the middle of this shifting tide, and I feared what the coming days might bring. It was as if the ground beneath me was slowly giving way, and I was desperately trying to hold on to whatever remained of the life I had built. Looking back, I can see the signs were always there. Small, almost imperceptible moments that hinted at a betrayal I couldn't yet grasp. But feeling the unease and naming it are two different things, and I was still caught in the fog of disbelief and hope. The night everything changed was a turning point I never saw coming, and what happened then still leaves my father and sister speechless to this day. But before that night, before the silence shattered and the truth came crashing down, there was a fragile calm, a calm that I knew wouldn't last. And as the pieces began to shift, I started to realize that I would need a plan, something no one expected, to protect what mattered most to me. As days turned into weeks, the subtle shifts within my family became harder to overlook. It wasn't one dramatic event, but a series of small, almost imperceptible moments that chipped away at the foundation of trust and belonging I once felt. My father, once a figure I admired and confided in, now seemed more like a stranger occupying the same room. His eyes rarely met mine, and when they did, there was a coldness that didn't belong to the man who had taught me to ride a bike or cheered me on at every school play. Instead, there was a quiet distance, a kind of indifference that stung more than any harsh word could. My sister's transformation was even more bewildering. We used to share everything, secrets whispered late at night, endless laughter, and a bond I believed unbreakable. But gradually, her laughter turned hollow when I was around. She stopped inviting me to family dinners or weekend outings, and if I managed to join, she was distracted, her attention elsewhere, as if I were a mere shadow in the background. The warmth in her eyes faded, replaced by a guarded look that made me question if I had done something wrong. I replayed our interactions countless times, searching for a cause, but found only a growing sense of exclusion. There were countless moments when this became painfully clear. At my birthday last year, my father barely glanced my way, engrossed instead in conversations with his new circle of friends or his wife, who seemed to have effortlessly taken over the family's social scene. My sister sat across the room, her phone lighting up with messages that she answered with smiles and quick exchanges, none of which included me. The silence between us was louder than any argument, a silent message that I was no longer part of their world. I caught myself shrinking in these moments, trying to make myself smaller, hoping to avoid conflict or awkwardness. I told myself it was just a phase, that families go through rough patches, and that maybe my sister was simply busy or distracted by her own life. I convinced myself that my father's distance was a result of stress or preoccupation, not something personal. I wanted to believe in the goodness beneath these changes, to hold on to the hope that things would eventually return to how they were. But the subtle cruelty was there, threaded through the everyday. Invitations to family gatherings would arrive too late for me to make plans, or sometimes not at all. When I did reach out, the responses were brief and polite, lacking the warmth I remembered. My fiancé noticed the shift too and tried to comfort me, but even her reassurances couldn't mask the growing ache inside. I felt caught in a web of loneliness, surrounded by people who once promised unconditional love, but now seemed to keep me at arm's length. At work, I found myself distracted, unable to focus as the emotional weight followed me like a shadow. Sleep became elusive, as my mind replayed every slight, every cold glance, every moment of exclusion. I began questioning my worth, my place in this fractured family, and even my judgment in choosing the people I trusted most. The quiet despair settled deep within, a burden I carried silently, unwilling to burden others with my pain. Still, I held on to loyalty and love, hoping they would be enough to bridge the growing divide. I reminded myself that family isn't perfect, and that sometimes love means enduring hardship without complaint. I refused to confront my father or sister, fearing that confrontation might shatter what little connection remained. Instead, I watched and waited, hoping for a sign, a gesture or a word, that could rekindle the bond we had lost. Yet, even as I waited, a subtle shift was taking place within me. The confusion and hurt began to harden into something more resolute, a quiet awareness that the family I knew was changing in ways I couldn't ignore. The fragile calm I clung to was fracturing, and with it, my understanding of loyalty and trust was starting to evolve. I found myself questioning not just their actions, but the very foundation on which I had built my hopes and dreams. That slow, undeniable change in perspective was the first crack in the silence, a crack that would soon widen and reshape everything I thought I knew about love, betrayal, and the lengths I would have to go to protect what mattered most. The night I stumbled upon the truth is etched into my memory like a jagged scar, one of those moments where time slows, and everything you thought you knew fractures into 1,000 uneasy shards. I wasn't looking for answers that evening, just trying to catch a breath from the mounting tension that had been suffocating me for months. The house was quieter than usual. My fiancé was out of town visiting family, and I had convinced myself that a night alone would help me piece together the wreckage of my thoughts. But instead, it shattered something deeper inside. I was going to bed when I heard voices, low, hushed, but unmistakable, coming from the living room. At first, I thought I was imagining things, the way exhaustion can play tricks on your mind. But then I caught the unmistakable cadence of my sister's voice, soft but firm, and another voice that made my blood run cold. It was my father's. Curiosity, or maybe something darker like dread, pulled me reluctantly toward the doorway. I froze in the shadowed hallway, heart hammering so loudly I was sure they could hear it. They were talking, but not in the way families should talk. There was a tension there, a palpable undercurrent of something secretive and wrong. My sister was pleading softly. "Daniel doesn't deserve this, but I can't ignore how you've changed things." My father's voice, low and insistent, cut through her hesitation. "He's holding her back. She deserves better. A life without the weight he carries. And I'm the one who can give it to her." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The words weren't just a betrayal. They were a declaration. He wasn't just indifferent. He was actively trying to take the woman I loved away from me. And the worst part, my own sister was siding with him. I wanted to scream, to break down the door and confront them, but I was paralyzed. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Was this some twisted fantasy? A nightmare I could wake up from? But the voices, the words, they were real, and they cut through every hope I had left. I remember the cold press of the wall against my back, the faint hum of the night outside, and the way my hands trembled so violently I had to grip the doorframe to stay upright. My breath came in shallow gasps as I tried to steady the storm inside me. I felt betrayed beyond words, but also unbearably alone, like the ground I'd stood on had vanished beneath my feet. The woman I trusted with my heart was caught in a tug-of-war I never saw coming, and my own blood was pulling her away. That night, silence became my only refuge. I retreated to my room, shutting out the world, the voices, the betrayal. But even in the quiet, my mind was loud. Relentless flashes of moments I'd misread, conversations that suddenly made sense in a cruel new light. I saw the guarded looks, The cold shoulders, the half-truths for what they were, pieces of a plan that had been unfolding all along. I realized then that denial, my desperate shield, was crumbling. The loyalty I'd clung to was no longer a shield but a chain, binding me to a family that didn't have my back. The love I'd hoped would protect us all was being weaponized against me, twisted into something I couldn't recognize. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of betrayal settle like a stone in my chest. The man who was supposed to be my father was plotting to steal my future. My sister, the person I thought would stand beside me, was complicit, and the woman I loved was caught in the storm between us. That night changed everything. It forced me to see my family not as a safe harbor but as a battlefield. And as the first light crept through the blinds, I understood that I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to fight, not just for love, but for the truth. Because what I had uncovered wasn't just a family rift, it was a fracture that threatened to shatter the very foundation of who I was. And in that silence, filled with the echoes of their voices, I vowed to take back what was mine, even if it meant standing alone against them all. That morning, the house felt different, like a fragile glass sculpture teetering on the edge of a table. The echoes of the night before still clung to the walls, ghostly reminders of the betrayal I'd witnessed. But instead of bursting into anger or despair, I chose something quieter, a retreat into myself that felt both necessary and terrifying. I walked outside, the cold air hitting my skin like a shock, grounding me in the present. The sky was a muted gray, the kind of overcast that mirrors the dull ache inside. I didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to pretend like everything was normal. So I didn't. I left my phone on silent, didn't reply to messages, and avoided the places where I might run into my father or sister. It wasn't about running away. It was about creating space, a small sanctuary where I could breathe without the weight of their presence pressing down on me. As I wandered through the quiet streets, the world felt strangely indifferent. People passed by, absorbed in their own lives, oblivious to the turmoil inside me. I found a bench in the park and sat down, letting the cold seep into my bones. It was a physical kind of pain, sharp and immediate, but also a relief. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel the sadness fully, the sting of loss, the ache of abandonment, the bitter taste of betrayal. But beneath that sadness was something else, a flicker of clarity. In the silence, away from their voices and their schemes, I began to untangle the knot of emotions twisting inside me. I realized that the loyalty I'd felt was a choice, not an obligation. That love didn't have to mean surrendering my sense of self or my boundaries. And that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to step back and protect your heart, even if it means standing alone. I thought about my fiancée, how caught she was in this crossfire, how much she deserved peace and honesty. I decided then that I wouldn't let their betrayal define our future. I would guard what we had, quietly, but fiercely. No grand declarations or confrontations yet, just a steady, unshakable resolve to keep my world intact. There was guilt, of course. Guilt for pulling away from the family I'd once believed in, for abandoning the hope that things could be fixed. But that guilt was tempered by a deep, necessary self-respect. I wasn't giving up. I was choosing to protect myself from a storm that wasn't mine to weather alone. That afternoon, I wrote a letter, not to confront or accuse, but to set boundaries. I poured my heart onto the page, explaining that I needed distance to heal, that I was stepping back not out of anger but out of love for myself and for the life I was building. I didn't send it immediately. It was a message to myself as much as to them. A quiet declaration of independence wrapped in vulnerability. As evening fell, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker to life. The world outside moved on, indifferent and relentless. But inside me, something had shifted. The pain was still there, raw and real, but it was no longer paralyzing. Instead, it felt like the first breath after being submerged underwater. A cautious, hopeful inhale that promised I could survive this. In that moment, I understood that the silence I embraced was not surrender. It was a choice, a boundary, a beginning. And as the night deepened, I felt a new kind of strength rising, a quiet, steady flame that would guide me through whatever came next. The next morning, I received a message that I hadn't expected, something simple, almost casual, but it stirred something inside me. It was from an old college friend, Mark, someone I hadn't spoken to in years but who had always been a steady presence in my life back then. His message was brief. "Hey Daniel, I heard things are rough. If you want to talk, I'm here." At first, I hesitated. Reaching out had felt impossible lately. I was so wrapped up in my own turmoil that I'd shut out almost everyone. But something about Mark's words pierced through the fog. I replied. Meeting him that afternoon was like stepping into a different world, one where I wasn't defined by the fractures in my family or the betrayals that had left me reeling. Mark listened without judgment as I spilled the fragments of my story, the hurt and confusion pouring out in a way I hadn't allowed myself before. What surprised me most wasn't just his sympathy, but the clarity he brought. He didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me to forgive and forget. Instead, he asked questions that made me think, what did I want? What boundaries was I willing to set? And most importantly, what kind of future did I deserve? For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of agency, a realization that the chaos I'd been drowning in didn't have to dictate my next move. Mark reminded me that loyalty to others shouldn't come at the expense of loyalty to myself. He spoke of strength not as stubborn endurance, but as the courage to redefine relationships on my own terms. Hearing this made me wonder if I'd been clinging to a version of family that no longer existed, and if maybe, just maybe, I had permission to rewrite that story. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, turning over his words like a key in a lock. The pain hadn't vanished, but the sharp edges dulled slightly, replaced by a strange new energy. I realized I'd been so focused on what others were doing to me that I'd lost sight of what I could do for myself. This wasn't about revenge or confrontation. It was about reclaiming my life from the shadows of betrayal. I began to sketch out a plan, not a grand scheme, but a series of small, deliberate steps to protect my relationship and my peace of mind. I thought about having an honest conversation with my fiancé, sharing everything I'd learned and felt, so we could face this together, rather than letting secrets build walls between us. I considered seeking professional advice, someone impartial who could help me navigate the emotional minefield without getting lost in blame or bitterness. And most importantly, I made a quiet promise to myself. No matter what happened, I would not allow their actions to define my worth or my happiness. There was still fear, of loss, of confrontation, of the unknown path ahead. Vulnerability lingered like a shadow at the edge of my resolve. But now, it was balanced by something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that healing was possible. Hope that I could find allies in unexpected places. And hope that I could emerge from this fractured family not broken, but stronger. As I closed my journal that night, I caught my reflection in the window. Tired. Yes, but unmistakably determined. For the first time since the betrayal, I wasn't just surviving. I was preparing to fight back in my own way. The silence that once felt suffocating was shifting, becoming a space for strategy and strength. I didn't know exactly what the next chapter would hold, or how the pieces would fall, but something inside told me that things were about to change, and this time, I would be the one steering the course. There are nights when the silence becomes a weight too heavy to bear, and I find myself caught between the past I can't undo, and the future I'm still too afraid to fully embrace. It's in those moments, when the world feels like a fragile glass sphere threatening to shatter under the slightest pressure, that my thoughts spiral into the tangled web of what-ifs and might-have-beens. I realize now that the hardest battle isn't the one fought with others. It's the one I face alone, inside my own heart. I keep returning to memories I once cherished, now refracted through a prism of doubt. Like the time my father taught me to ride a bike, his hands steadying me, his voice patient and encouraging. I used to think of that day as a symbol of trust and love, a simple moment where everything felt safe. But now, it feels like a cruel irony. How could the same hands that lifted me up be the ones plotting to tear me down? The innocence of that memory clashes with the bitter truth, and I find myself mourning not just what was lost, but the way my understanding of love itself has been fractured. Then there's my sister. I remember late-night talks, whispering secrets under the soft glow of a bedside lamp, dreams shared in hushed tones. Those moments were real. Were they not? Or were they just a prelude to this betrayal? The lines blur, and I grapple with the unsettling question. Was I blind to signs, or was she simply someone I never truly knew? The confusion gnaws at me, because if the person I trusted most could turn away, what does that say about the nature of loyalty? I wrestle with guilt too. That persistent shadow that tells me maybe I should have seen this coming. Should have done more to hold us together. I wonder if my own stubbornness or silence fed the divide. Maybe if I'd confronted things earlier or been less guarded, the story would be different. But then I recall the nights I chose peace over conflict, hoping that time would heal the cracks. Was that hope naive? Or was it an act of love that simply wasn't enough? These questions haunt me, their answers elusive and painful. There's also the fear of losing the woman I love, not just to their schemes, but to the inevitable scars this ordeal leaves on her heart. I see her caught in the crossfire, torn between loyalty and love, and I feel helpless. How do I protect her from a storm that isn't hers to fight? The thought of her pain is a wound I carry silently, a quiet ache that no amount of resolve can fully mend. Amidst this turmoil, I confront my own contradictions. I want to fight fiercely, to reclaim what's mine, yet part of me longs for the simplicity of those early days before betrayal seeped in. I crave connection even while I steel myself for distance. I'm torn between anger and forgiveness, between holding on and letting go. The emotional landscape feels like a shifting tide, sometimes calm, sometimes crashing with overwhelming force. In these moments of vulnerability, I see the rawness beneath my own facade. The boy who once sought approval and belonging, now forced to redefine what family means. I realize that my identity, once so entwined with theirs, needs room to breathe and grow independently. It's a painful shedding, like autumn leaves falling away to make space for new life. I remind myself that healing isn't linear. It's a mosaic of setbacks and breakthroughs, doubts and certainties. And maybe, just maybe, it's okay to not have all the answers yet. To allow the ache to exist alongside hope, and to give myself permission to be imperfect, conflicted, and scared. As I sit with these feelings, I begin to sense a fragile shift, a quiet acceptance that some questions may remain unanswered, and some wounds might never fully close. But within that acceptance, there is a seed of peace. Not the peace of forgetting or pretending, but the peace of acknowledging my pain without letting it define me. And in that stillness, I find the courage to begin moving, not away from the past, but inward, toward a place where I can hold my brokenness gently and start to heal. That afternoon, as I was trying to steady the fragile calm I'd carved out for myself, everything exploded in a way I never saw coming. I was at work when my phone buzzed, multiple messages, each from different numbers I didn't recognize. The texts were blunt, cruel, screenshots of private conversations between my sister and my fiancé. Messages that twisted the truth into a weapon. They painted me as controlling, jealous, even dishonest. Words I never said, moments I never lived. Someone was trying to destroy me, and it was coming from the people I once called family. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages, the carefully crafted lies cutting deeper than any knife. My sister's words, once a source of comfort, were now turned against me. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore, it was public. Someone wanted to dismantle everything I'd fought to protect, and they'd started a war I hadn't even known was underway. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind raced, heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat of impending doom. How long had this been going on? Who else had seen these messages? My fiancé was out of town, unreachable, and I felt helpless as the poison spread without me. The carefully built fortress of my life was crumbling, brick by brick, and I was standing in the rubble, stunned and exposed. Later that evening, my sister showed up at my apartment. Her face was unreadable. No apology, no regret, just cold calculation. "You should have known this would come out," she said quietly, almost matter of fact. "You pushed us away, Daniel. You left a gap, and we filled it." There was no remorse in her voice, only accusation. I wanted to scream, to ask how she could do this, but the words caught in my throat. The person I had trusted most was now standing before me as my worst enemy. I shut the door before she could say more. my hands trembling as I leaned against it. The silence that followed was suffocating, but it was nothing compared to the chaos inside my head. I wasn't just fighting betrayal anymore. I was fighting a smear campaign designed to isolate me, to break me down piece by piece. That night, I sat alone in the dark, the weight of their betrayal pressing down harder than ever. I realized the war had moved beyond whispered conversations and cold shoulders. It was out in the open now, ruthless and relentless. And, if I didn't act fast, I'd lose everything. Not just my family, but the woman I loved, my dignity, and maybe even myself. In that moment, the choice was clear. I could crumble under the pressure, or I could rise and fight back with everything I had. There was no turning back. The line had been crossed, and the battle for my life had begun. The morning after the messages and my sister's cold visit, I woke with a heaviness that felt different. Heavier, somehow, but also clearer. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, "This ends now." It wasn't anger or desperation driving me. It was a steady, unwavering resolve I hadn't known I possessed. I realized that all the silence, all the second-guessing had brought me here, to a point where I had to choose who I was going to be moving forward. I didn't want a dramatic showdown or a fiery argument. I needed something steadier, cleaner, a line drawn with intention, not emotion. So, I sat down and wrote. Not a letter to anyone else this time, but a letter to myself. A promise. A declaration. I wrote about the pain, the heartbreak, and the betrayal. But I also wrote about the strength I was reclaiming. I named the boundaries I was setting, not because I wanted to push people away, but because I needed to protect my own heart from further harm. Later that day, when my phone buzzed again with messages from unknown numbers, I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked them all. I refused to let their poison seep into the spaces I was building for healing. When my father called, his voice smooth, attempting to sound casual, I let it ring out. No guilt, no hesitation. I wasn't available to be pulled back into the chaos. My sister's texts went unanswered, her attempts to justify or manipulate left unread. That night, I met my fiancée at the airport. She was exhausted from her trip, but the moment I saw her, I felt a surge of resolve. I took her hands in mine and told her everything. The secret conversations, the lies, the betrayal. But more importantly, I told her what I was choosing now. Honesty, transparency, and a fierce commitment to us. I promised that no matter what storms came, we would face them side by side, without secrets or shadows between us. The conversation wasn't easy. There were tears, whispered fears, and moments of silence, heavy with unspoken questions. But beneath it all was a shared understanding that whatever the past held, our future was ours to define. I wasn't asking for forgiveness from my family. I was reclaiming my own narrative. In the days that followed, I stopped waiting for signs or invitations. I stopped hoping for apologies that might never come. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life around the people who truly mattered, those who lifted me up rather than tore me down. I invested time in friendships long neglected, in work that gave me purpose, and in the quiet moments that reminded me who I was beneath the hurt. The cost was real. There was loneliness in cutting ties, grief for the family I thought I had, and a raw ache for the trust that had been broken beyond repair. But with each step away from the past, I felt a weight lift, a freedom born not from revenge, but from acceptance and self-respect. I finally understood that standing my ground wasn't about winning a battle against them. It was about winning myself back. It was about choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and love that doesn't come at the expense of my own soul. And so, with a heart both bruised and brave, I say this to myself, and to anyone who has ever been betrayed by those they loved. I am enough, I am whole, and I am finally free. The days that followed felt like stepping into a different rhythm. A slower, quieter pace where the noise of the past no longer dictated every breath I took. I moved into a small apartment not far from the city center, a space stripped down to essentials, where each item had a purpose and every corner felt like a deliberate choice. Unpacking boxes became a ritual of reclamation, folding clothes with care, arranging books on shelves, placing photos of happier times in spots that made me smile without pain. It wasn't about erasing memory but creating a sanctuary. a place where I could breathe without the weight of old wounds pressing down. Morning light filtered through linen curtains, soft and unassuming, and I found myself waking without the familiar knot of dread in my chest. The quiet hours before the world stirred became mine, a time to sip coffee slowly, to journal not out of desperation, but from a place of gentle reflection. I'd start the day with stretches, grounding myself in the present, feeling muscles loosen beneath skin that still carried the tension of months past. These small acts, mundane to some, were milestones for me, markers of a fragile peace beginning to take root. Emotionally, I was a tangle of contrasts. Relief mingled with exhaustion, like coming up for air after being submerged too long. There were moments when numbness settled over me, a dullness that shielded raw edges but also kept joy at arm's length. Yet beneath that veil, a quiet empowerment stirred, a knowing that I was no longer a captive to their narrative. I found strength in this stillness, in the space between heartache and hope, where I could simply be without performance or pretense. My father's calls came sporadically, voicemail messages left with practiced calm and thinly veiled regret. I listened once or twice, then let them fade into silence, choosing not to respond. My sister's texts followed a similar pattern, half-hearted attempts at reconciliation laced with blame and justification. Each time, I replied with a measured calm, setting boundaries that felt both firm and necessary. "I'm focusing on healing right now," I'd write. "Please respect my space." No anger, just clear lines drawn in the sand. In this new chapter, I sought out old friends I'd unintentionally drifted from. A coffee with Mark turned into a weekly ritual, a reminder that connection could be nurturing rather than draining. I rekindled a love for early morning runs, the rhythm of feet against pavement syncing with a heartbeat learning to trust itself again. Evenings were often spent cooking simple meals, the act of creating nourishing food a quiet rebellion against the chaos that had once consumed me. I resisted the urge to fill every silence with noise or distraction. Instead, I embraced moments of solitude as opportunities for growth, reading books that challenged my perspective, exploring meditation, and allowing myself the grace to feel without judgment. There was a tenderness in learning to care for myself, a soft but unyielding promise that my worth was not tethered to others' approval. This was not about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about reclaiming my own story, piece by piece, in a way that honored my truth without bitterness. The past still lingered, but it no longer held the power to shatter me. I was building walls not to trap or exclude, but to protect the fragile garden of my heart, allowing new growth to emerge in its own time. As the weeks passed, I could feel the contours of a new identity taking shape, one defined not by betrayal or loss, but by resilience and self-respect. I was no longer a prisoner of what had been done to me. I was the architect of what was yet to come. And with that realization came a quiet certainty. This was the beginning of something different, something wholly my own. Looking back now, I see how much of my life was shaped by shadows I didn't fully understand at the time. The betrayals, the silences, the fractures, they were painful, yes, but they also became unexpected teachers. I've come to realize that sometimes the people we love the most are not the ones who carry us through, and that's a truth both difficult and freeing. I no longer carry resentment for what was broken, but rather an acceptance of what simply couldn't be fixed. It's a subtle shift, from holding onto wounds as proof of pain, to allowing them to be reminders of survival. I've learned that love isn't always about keeping people close. Sometimes it's about knowing when to step back so you don't lose yourself. It's about honoring your own worth, even when those who should cherish you fail to see it. I've let go of the need to control the story others tell, choosing instead to write my own version, one that acknowledges hurt but also holds space for healing. There is a quiet peace in this perspective, a calm that comes not from forgetting the past, but from no longer letting it dictate my present. I find comfort in small moments now, a morning walk with the sun warming my face, a genuine laugh shared with a friend, the steady rhythm of everyday life unfolding without chaos. These moments don't erase the scars. They simply remind me that life continues, and so do I. To anyone watching who has faced betrayal or heartbreak, I want you to know this. Your value is not diminished by others' actions or choices. You deserve relationships that build you up, not tear you down. It's okay to protect your heart fiercely. Healing isn't a destination, but a gradual unfolding, a patient tending to the self that remains when the noise settles. And sometimes, the most courageous act is to keep moving forward, gently and without apology. If this story resonates with you, or if you know someone who might find solace in these words, I invite you to share this video. A simple like or subscription helps us create a space where honesty and healing can live. Together, we remind each other that we're not alone in our struggles. Thank you for listening, for holding space with me. And as you go on with your day, may you carry with you a quiet hope that even in brokenness, there is a kind of grace waiting to be found.